What happens when a man who callously discarded his pregnant wife for a younger model gets a front row seat to her spectacular comeback? Ethan thought he had it all. A hot new girlfriend, who he boasted looked like a movie star, and the freedom from his boring old life. He couldn't stop rubbing his ex-wife Olivia's nose in it, but he never imagined that while he was busy showing off his cheap imitation, Olivia was being quietly courted by one of the world's most elusive billionaires. Get ready for a story of ultimate revenge, where the red carpet becomes a battlefield and a scorned woman's triumph is witnessed by the entire world. Ethan Thorne was a man who collected beautiful things. His penthouse apartment in the heart of Manhattan's Soho district was a testament to his exquisite, if somewhat soulless, taste. Polished chrome and stark white leather furniture sat on a vast expanse of imported Italian marble. Abstract art by fashionable, up-and-coming artists adorned the walls, each piece a calculated investment. His watch was a Patek Philippe. His suits were exclusively Tom Ford, and his car, a sleek black Aston Martin DB11, purred with the promise of power and prestige. And then there was Isabella, his latest and most prized acquisition. Isabella Rossi was, in Ethan's own bombastic words, a real-life movie star. With her cascade of raven hair, sultry almond-shaped eyes, and a figure that seemed to have been sculpted by the gods themselves, she was the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. A 24-year-old aspiring actress and Instagram model with a following of moderately impressed bots and thirsty men, she was the perfect accessory for a man like Ethan. He paraded her around the city's most exclusive restaurants, a smug grin permanently etched on his face as he basked in the envious stares of other men. "Look at her," he'd say to his friends, his voice a low proprietary murmur, as Isabella preened for a selfie at their table at Balthazar. "She's got that Sophia Loren thing going on, doesn't she? A classic beauty. You can't find that anymore." His friends, a sycophantic chorus of yes-men who benefited from his generosity, would nod in enthusiastic agreement. What Ethan conveniently omitted from his triumphant narrative was the woman he had so recently discarded to make room for his new movie star, his wife of 5 years, Olivia. And she was pregnant with his child. Olivia Thorne, soon to be Olivia Parker again, was the antithesis of Isabella. Where Isabella was a dazzling firework, Olivia was a quiet, steady flame. She had a gentle beauty with warm, honey-blonde hair that she often wore in a simple, elegant chignon, and intelligent, kind eyes that seemed to see right through Ethan's carefully constructed facade. She was a talented landscape architect, a woman who found beauty in the natural world, not in the fleeting trends of fashion and fame. She had been the grounding force in Ethan's life, the one who had supported him when he was just a struggling entrepreneur with a dream. She had been his partner in every sense of the word, and he had repaid her loyalty with a betrayal so profound it had shattered her world. The day he had left her was seared into her memory like a brand. She had been 6 months pregnant, her body changing in ways that were both miraculous and terrifying. She had been planning the nursery, a room filled with light and love, a sanctuary for the child they had both so desperately wanted. He had come home from a business trip to Miami, his face a mask of cold indifference. He had told her with all the emotion of a man discussing a failed business venture that he was in love with someone else. Someone younger, someone more exciting, someone who didn't have stretch marks and morning sickness. "I need to be with someone who inspires me." "Liv," he had said, the casual shortening of her name a cruel twist of the knife. "Someone who makes me feel alive." He had already packed his bags. Her world, once a vibrant landscape of shared dreams and future hopes, had been reduced to a barren wasteland in the space of a single heartless conversation. The divorce had been swift and brutal. Ethan, ever the pragmatist, had offered her a generous settlement, a gilded cage to keep her quiet and out of his new glamorous life. He had kept the Soho penthouse, of course. Olivia had taken the money and retreated to a quiet tree-lined street in Brooklyn, to a brownstone that she had once dreamed of renovating with him. Now she would do it alone. But Ethan couldn't just leave her be. He seemed to derive a perverse pleasure from flaunting his new life in her face. He would post endless pictures of himself and Isabella on Instagram. Their lives, a curated montage of private jets, exotic vacations, and champagne-fueled parties. He'd tag her in the posts, a digital slap in the face. He'd even had the audacity to send her a Christmas card, featuring a professionally shot photo of him and Isabella, clad in matching cashmere sweaters, grinning inanely in front of a roaring fire in a ski lodge in Aspen. On the back, in his neat, arrogant script, he had written, "Wishing you a Merry Christmas. Hope you're doing well." Olivia had thrown the card in the fireplace, watching as the flames consumed their smug, perfect faces. But the hurt remained a dull, persistent ache in her chest. She was carrying his child, a constant living reminder of his betrayal, and he was living a life of consequence-free bliss with a woman who was little more than a child herself. Her friends, a fiercely protective circle of women who had known her since college, were incandescent with rage. "He's a monster." Liv, her best friend Chloe, had said, her voice trembling with anger. "A soulless, narcissistic monster. How can you be so calm?" But Olivia wasn't calm. She was drowning. The joy she should have been feeling about her impending motherhood was tainted by the bitterness of her heartbreak. She would sit in the half-finished nursery, surrounded by boxes of unassembled furniture and untouched baby clothes, and weep until she had no tears left. She felt like a ghost in her own life, a silent observer of her own slow-motion collapse. Ethan, meanwhile, was blissfully unaware of the depths of her despair. Or perhaps he was aware and simply didn't care. His world was a bubble of self-congratulation, and Olivia was a distant, unpleasant memory that he could easily dismiss. He was too busy curating his image as the man who had it all. He had even started a blog, a pretentious, self-aggrandizing platform where he pontificated on everything from investment strategies to the art of living a bespoke life. He wrote a post titled, "Trading Up Why I Chose a Life of Authenticity and Passion," that was a thinly veiled justification for leaving Olivia. He didn't mention her by name, of course. He simply referred to his previous chapter as a time of stagnation and compromise. He wrote about the importance of surrounding oneself with vibrant, inspiring people, and it was clear to anyone who knew him that he was talking about Isabella. The post went viral in their small, privileged circle. People whispered about it at dinner parties, their eyes filled with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. Olivia's name was on everyone's lips, the wronged woman, the discarded wife. She felt the weight of their stares, the sting of their pity, every time she ventured out of her brownstone. Ethan, on the other hand, was basking in the attention. He saw himself as a maverick, a man who had dared to break free from the suffocating confines of a conventional life. He was a pioneer of personal fulfillment, a guru of self-actualization. He was also a first-class fool, and his downfall was destined to be as spectacular as his rise. But for now, he was on top of the world, his movie star girlfriend on his arm, the city at his feet. He had no idea that the woman he had so carelessly cast aside was about to rewrite her own story, and that her comeback would be more dazzling than anything he could ever have imagined. The seeds of his humiliation were being sown in the quiet tree-lined streets of Brooklyn, in the heart of a woman who was slowly, painstakingly putting the pieces of her shattered life back together. And when she was whole again, she would be a force to be reckoned with. Ethan Thorne, the man who thought he had everything, was about to lose the one thing he had never truly valued, his dignity. The first few months after Ethan left were a blur of pain and progesterone. Olivia moved through her days in a fog of grief, her pregnancy a bittersweet reminder of a future that had been stolen from her. She would wake up in the middle of the night, her hand instinctively reaching for the empty space in the bed beside her, and the reality of her aloneness would hit her with the force of a physical blow. The brownstone, which she had once envisioned as a warm and welcoming family home, felt cavernous and cold, its silence amplifying her loneliness. Her friends Chloe and another close friend, Jessica, a sharp-witted lawyer, who had handled her divorce with a ferocious tenacity, formed a protective cocoon around her. They would show up at her doorstep armed with tubs of Ben and Jerry's trashy magazines and a bottomless well of righteous indignation on her behalf. They would listen to her weep, they would rail against Ethan's cruelty, and they would gently but firmly nudge her towards the future. "You can't let him win. Win, Liv," Jessica had said one evening, her voice firm as she watched Olivia listlessly poke at a salad. "And right now, by letting yourself waste away like this, you're letting him win. You need to show him, and more importantly, you need to show yourself that your life didn't end when he walked out that door." Jessica's words, though harsh, were a necessary jolt. Olivia knew she was right. She couldn't let her grief consume her, not when she had a new life growing inside her, a life that deserved a happy, healthy mother. That night, she made a decision. She would not be a victim. She would be a survivor. The next morning, she woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. She started with the nursery. She unpacked the boxes, assembled the crib, and painted the walls a soft sunshine yellow. She hung a mobile of delicate hand-carved wooden animals above the crib, and as she watched them twirl in the gentle morning breeze, a flicker of hope ignited within her. This room was not a monument to her loss. It was a promise of a new beginning. She threw herself into her work, channeling her pain and anger into creativity. As a landscape architect, she had always found solace in the natural world, in the patient, resilient beauty of plants and trees. She took on a new project, a commission, to design a rooftop garden for a new luxury hotel in downtown Manhattan. The project was ambitious and demanding, and it was exactly what she needed. She spent her days poring over blueprints, sketching designs, and sourcing rare and exotic plants. The work was a balm to her wounded soul, a tangible way to create beauty in a world that had suddenly turned ugly. It was during a visit to a specialist nursery in upstate New York that her life took an unexpected turn. She was searching for a particular variety of Japanese maple, a rare weeping cultivar with delicate lace-like leaves. The owner of the nursery, a gruff but knowledgeable man named Mr. Henderson, told her that he had sold his last one to a private collector. "A real plant enthusiast, this fella?" Mr. Henderson had said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Buys up all my best stock. Lives up on a massive estate on the Hudson. A real recluse, they say. Name's Sebastian Croft." The name meant nothing to Olivia. She was disappointed, but she thanked Mr. Henderson and was about to leave when a sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up to the nursery. A tall, impeccably dressed man with silvering hair and piercing blue eyes stepped out of the car. He exuded an aura of quiet authority, a man who was used to being in command of his surroundings. Mr. Henderson's face lit up. "Well, speak of the devil," he muttered to Olivia. "That's him. That's Mr. Croft." Sebastian Croft overheard him, and a faint, amused smile touched his lips. He approached them, his gaze falling on Olivia. There was an intensity in his eyes that made her feel both seen and slightly flustered. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," he said, his voice a low, cultured baritone that sent an unexpected shiver down her spine. "Not at all, Mr. Croft," Mr. Henderson said jovially. "This young lady was just inquiring about your Japanese maple." Sebastian Croft's gaze shifted back to Olivia, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "My Japanese maple," Olivia found her voice. "Yes," she said, her tone more confident than she felt. "The Acer palmatum." "Ryusen, I was hoping to use it in a project I'm designing." Sebastian Croft's eyebrows rose in surprise. "You're a landscape architect?" "Yes," she said. "Olivia Parker." He extended a hand. "Sebastian Croft. It's a pleasure to meet you, Ms. Parker." His handshake was firm and warm, and he held her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. They talked for over an hour, their conversation flowing as easily as the nearby stream. He was fascinated by her work, and she was captivated by his deep knowledge of botany and his passion for conservation. He told her about his estate on the Hudson, a vast property that he was slowly rewilding, returning it to its natural state. He spoke with a quiet passion that was a world away from Ethan's loud, boastful pronouncements. As they were about to part ways, he said, "I know this is forward, but I would be fascinated to see your designs for the hotel rooftop. And perhaps you might be interested in seeing my Japanese maple." Olivia was taken aback, but she found herself smiling. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Croft." "Sebastian," he corrected her gently. Their first date, as Chloe would later excitedly call it, was a visit to his estate the following weekend. It was a world away from the glitz and glamour of Manhattan. A long, winding driveway led through a dense forest of ancient trees to a magnificent stone-built manor house that overlooked the Hudson River. The grounds were a breathtaking tapestry of rolling hills, wildflower meadows, and meticulously tended gardens. Sebastian gave her a tour of the property, his love for the land evident in every word he spoke. He showed her his prized Japanese maple, its delicate crimson leaves a splash of vibrant color against the lush green of the surrounding forest. He showed her his greenhouses filled with rare and exotic orchids. He showed her the apiary where he kept bees and the organic vegetable garden that supplied his kitchen. They had lunch on a sun-drenched terrace overlooking the river, a simple, delicious meal of fresh-baked bread, artisanal cheeses, and salads made with vegetables from his garden. They talked for hours about everything and nothing. She found herself opening up to him in a way she hadn't with anyone in a long time. She told him about her pregnancy, her recent divorce, and her struggle to rebuild her life. She didn't mean to the words, just tumbled out of her a torrent of pent-up pain and vulnerability. He listened patiently, his blue eyes filled with a compassion that was so genuine it brought tears to her eyes. He didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. He simply listened, and in his quiet, attentive presence she felt a sense of peace that had been absent from her life for so long. When she told him about Ethan, about his cruelty, and his constant need for validation, a flicker of something cold and hard entered his eyes. "He sounds like a very small man," he said, his voice low and firm. Olivia was startled by the fierce protectiveness in his tone. For the first time since Ethan had left, she felt a sense of safety, a feeling of being cherished. As the afternoon drew to a close, he walked her back to her car. "I hope this isn't the last time I see you, Olivia," he said, his voice soft. "It won't be," she said, and she knew in her heart that it was true. Their relationship blossomed in the weeks that followed. They would meet for long walks in Central Park, for quiet dinners at out-of-the-way restaurants where they were unlikely to be seen, and for weekends at his estate on the Hudson. He was a perfect gentleman, attentive and kind, and he treated her with a reverence that was both thrilling and slightly terrifying. She learned more about him. He was a tech billionaire, the founder of a revolutionary software company that had changed the way the world communicated. He was notoriously private, a man who shunned the spotlight and valued his anonymity. He had been a widower for 10 years, his wife having died in a tragic accident. He had never remarried, and he had poured all his energy into his work and his philanthropic endeavors. He was everything Ethan was not: kind, humble, and genuinely interested in the world around him. He was a man of substance, a man of quiet strength, and he was, to Olivia's utter astonishment, falling in love with her. He never pressured her, never pushed for more than she was ready to give. He was patient and understanding, and he seemed to know instinctively what she needed. He would show up at her brownstone with her favorite takeout, or he would send her a bouquet of her favorite flowers, peonies, with a simple handwritten note that said, "Thinking of you." One evening, as they were sitting in front of the fireplace in her living room, he took her hand. Olivia, he said, his voice soft but firm. I know this is fast, and I know you've been through a lot, but I have to tell you how I feel. I'm falling in love with you. Tears welled up in Olivia's eyes. I'm falling in love with you too, Sebastian, she whispered. He leaned in and kissed her a gentle, tender kiss that was filled with all the unspoken emotions that had been building between them. It was a kiss that promised a future she had never dared to dream of, a future filled with love and laughter and the quiet joy of a shared life. As her due date approached, Sebastian became her rock. He went with her to her prenatal appointments, he helped her finish the nursery, and he was there holding her hand when she gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby boy. She named him Leo, a name that meant lion, a symbol of the strength she had found within herself. Ethan, meanwhile, was completely oblivious to the dramatic changes in Olivia's life. He was too wrapped up in his own world, too busy flaunting his movie star girlfriend and his perfect life. He had heard through the grapevine that Olivia had given birth, and he had sent her a perfunctory text message, "Congrats. Let me know what I owe you for child support." He had no idea that Olivia was no longer the broken, lonely woman he had left behind. He had no idea that she had found a love that was deeper and more profound than anything he could ever comprehend. And he had no idea that she was about to make a spectacular entrance back into the world on the arm of a man who could buy and sell him 1,000 times over. The stage was set for a showdown, and the red carpet was about to become a battleground. Ethan Thorne was about to learn a very public and very painful lesson in humility. While Olivia was cocooned in the quiet, authentic joy of new motherhood and burgeoning love, Ethan Thorne was aggressively marketing his own happiness. His life was no longer something to be lived, but a brand to be managed, and he was its most tireless, obnoxious promoter. His Instagram was the primary vehicle for this campaign, a relentless, high-gloss stream of manufactured bliss. Each post was a carefully composed tableau designed to scream success and effortless cool. Ethan and Isabella clinking champagne flutes on a private jet to St. Bart's. The caption, a casual #work hard play, hard. The two of them in matching Fendi ski suits in a Courchevel chalet looking artfully windswept. Isabella posing with a newly acquired, eye-wateringly expensive Hermes Birkin bag on the Pont des Arts in Paris, a lovelock with their initials visible just over her shoulder. The zenith of this public relations offensive was a sprawling 8-page feature in Prestige Living, a glossy magazine whose primary function was to flatter the egos of the newly rich. The article, brazenly titled, "The Art of the Upgrade." Ethan Thorne on life, love and living authentically, was a masterclass in narcissistic revisionist history. In it, Ethan, photographed in his stark Soho penthouse, pontificated on his personal philosophy, a toxic brew of plagiarized self-help quotes and breathtaking hypocrisy. Authenticity is everything. He was quoted as saying, his face airbrushed to an uncanny smoothness beaming from the page. It means having the courage to audit your life, to identify the elements that are no longer serving your highest self, and having the strength to cut them away. It can be painful, of course. People might not understand. But you can't build a future on a foundation of compromise. The thinly veiled cruelty was staggering. He referred to his 5-year marriage not by name, but as his previous chapter, a time of comfortable stagnation and muted colors. He spoke of his new life with Isabella as an explosion of vibrancy, a return to passion. The accompanying photos were a grotesque parody of intimacy. There was Isabella, draped in a sheer silk robe, perched on the edge of their vast, uncreased bed, hand-feeding him a single perfect strawberry. There was Ethan staring thoughtfully out his floor-to-ceiling windows, a glass of Macallan 25 in hand, as if contemplating the secrets of the universe rather than his stock portfolio. It was less a portrait of a relationship and more an advertisement for a life no one was actually living. The article landed like a grenade in their former social circle. Olivia's best friend Chloe was the one who broke the news, calling Olivia in a state of incandescent rage. "You will not believe this sanctimonious pig!" she shrieked down the phone, proceeding to read the most offensive passages aloud. Olivia, who was rocking a fussy milk-drunk Leo in her arms, listened in silence. The familiar acidic sting of betrayal pricked at her, but to her own surprise it was a distant sensation, a phantom limb of a pain that had mostly healed. When Chloe emailed her the link, she opened it on her laptop. She looked at the glossy, sterile images of the man she had once loved and the girl who had replaced her. They looked like two beautiful, expensive mannequins, their smiles vacant, their poses rigid. There was no life in their eyes. She looked down at the warm, snoring baby, nestled against her chest, at his tiny fist clutching her finger, and a wave of profound peace washed over her. She pressed a soft kiss to his downy head, inhaling his sweet, milky scent. This was real. This was authentic. This warm, messy, unpredictable, and deeply joyful reality was something Ethan, in his cold, curated world, would never understand. She closed the laptop, not with anger, but with a sudden, overwhelming wave of pity. He wasn't living a life. He was propping up a facade, and that had to be an exhausting, empty existence. When Sebastian visited that evening, he found the magazine open on the coffee table. He read the article in silence, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Olivia watched him, and when he was done, he placed it down gently and looked at her, his piercing blue eyes full of a quiet, protective fire. "He's terrified," Sebastian said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Men like that, men who need to shout their happiness from the rooftops, are the ones who have the least of it. It's a performance to convince himself, not the world. He's a very small man, Olivia, making a very loud noise to distract from his own emptiness." His words were a balm extinguishing the last embers of her hurt. He didn't just comfort her, he armed her with clarity, a new lens through which to see the man who had broken her heart. Ethan wasn't a titan to be feared, but a hollow shell to be pitied. In the months that followed, Olivia's world continued to expand as Ethan's, unbeknownst to him, began to shrink. Her rooftop garden project for the new Nomad Hotel was completed to rapturous reviews. It was a masterpiece of sustainable design, a lush urban oasis that felt both wild and serene. Her work earned her the prestigious National Landscape Design Award, a huge honor in her field. At the awards ceremony, she walked onto the stage, her pregnant form elegant in a simple, well-cut dress, and gave a brief, humble speech, thanking her team and speaking about her belief that creating green spaces in cities was an act of radical hope. The award led to a feature of her own, not in a vapid lifestyle circular, but in Architectural Digest. The photo shoot was the antithesis of Ethan's. The photographer shot in natural light, capturing Olivia, in her element, in the sun-drenched living room of her brownstone, her hands smudged with charcoal from sketching, or on the finished hotel rooftop. Her face lit with a genuine smile as she inspected a flowering vine. The article celebrated her talent, her vision, and her quiet, profound contribution to the beauty of the world. It was a dignified, powerful testament to her resilience and her craft. Her life with Sebastian deepened into the kind of partnership she had always craved. He seamlessly became a part of her and Leo's world. He was a man of immense wealth and influence, yet he found his greatest joy in the simplest things. He would lie on the floor of the brownstone for hours, his deep laughter echoing as he made silly faces at Leo. He learned to distinguish Leo's tired cry from his hungry one. He was there for the first real gummy smile, the first coo, the first time Leo rolled over. A moment they celebrated with the same hushed reverence as a major business deal. They were a family forged not by obligation, but by a deep, abiding, and quiet love. Ethan, meanwhile, was discovering that a life built on novelty has a very short shelf life. The dazzling thrill of Isabella was fading, revealing a chasm of incompatibility. Her conversations, which he had once found refreshingly simple, now seemed achingly dull. A looping track of celebrity gossip, brand names, and complaints about her Instagram algorithm. Her entire existence was performative, lived through the lens of her phone. He would try to talk to her about a new business venture or an article he'd read, and her eyes would glaze over before she'd interrupt to ask if he thought a particular filter made her look snatched. He was living with a beautiful, animated ghost. A strange, gnawing curiosity began to consume him. He started thinking about Olivia constantly. He found her new private Instagram account. A friend of a friend had let it slip. He created a fake profile to follow her. What he saw was a quiet gut punch. Her feed wasn't a performance. It was a diary. It was filled with candid, sun-drenched photos, Leo's feet impossibly tiny. Olivia laughing with dirt on her cheek from her garden. A close-up of plans for a new project. It was a life of substance, a life that felt real. He saw the photo from her awards night holding the heavy, elegant trophy, looking radiant and utterly self-possessed. Then he saw the one that stopped his breath. It was a candid shot, likely taken by a friend. Olivia and a man were sitting on a park bench, sharing a coffee. The man had his arm around her, and he was looking at her with an expression of such pure, unadulterated adoration that Ethan felt a hot, possessive surge of anger. Who the hell was this guy? His fingers flew across the keyboard. He searched her name, the awards, the hotel project. And then he found him. The man in the photo wasn't just some new boyfriend. He was Sebastian Croft. A quick, frantic search brought up a handful of old, rare articles from Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. Tech visionary, philanthropist, recluse, and a net worth with so many commas, it made Ethan's own considerable wealth look like a rounding error. The blood drained from Ethan's face. He felt a cold, sick dread pool in his stomach. He had left Olivia for an aspiring actress. He'd dressed up as a movie star, and she had quietly, without any fanfare, ended up with a man who could buy the entire movie studio, its back catalogue, and the island where they filmed. The sheer cosmic scale of his miscalculation was staggering. He saw himself not as the man who had upgraded, but as the fool who had traded a winning lottery ticket for a handful of magic beans. The final act was set in motion a few weeks later. The Met Gala, the absolute pinnacle of the social calendar, was approaching. "I'm one of the co-chairs this year," Sebastian mentioned casually one evening as they were cleaning up after dinner, Leo asleep in his bassinet nearby. "And I was hoping my partner would do me the honor of attending with me." Olivia froze, a dish towel in her hand. The thought was terrifying. The cameras, the crowds, the judgment, it was everything she had spent the last year escaping. "Oh, Seb, I don't think I can," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "That world, it's not me. I've been so happy being invisible." Sebastian came to her, taking the towel from her hands and enveloping them in his. He looked her directly in the eyes, his gaze steady and reassuring. "I know, and I wouldn't ask if it were just about a party," he said softly. "Think of it differently. This isn't about stepping back into his world. It's about you stepping into your own on your own terms. I want the world to see the woman I see every day. Not the wronged wife from the tabloids, but the brilliant, strong, beautiful artist who is creating the most incredible life. This isn't a performance, Olivia. It's a coronation. Your coronation." She looked at him, at the absolute belief in his eyes, and felt her fear begin to recede, replaced by a nascent flicker of excitement. He wasn't asking her to be an accessory. He was asking her to take her crown. "Okay." She breathed, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Okay, I'll go." The next day, she made a call to a stylist Sebastian had recommended, a legend known for creating iconic, elegant looks. As she described her vision, something graceful, powerful, and unapologetically her, she felt a sense of purpose solidifying within her. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Thorne was pulling every string he could, calling in every favor he was owed to secure his own tickets to the gala. He finally got them, and he and Isabella immediately began planning their assault on the red carpet, plotting a coordinated look designed to get them noticed. He had no idea he was a bit player in a drama he didn't even know was being written. He was preparing for a party, while Olivia was preparing for a resurrection. The night of the Met Gala was less a party and more a controlled detonation of fame and fashion. It was a sensory assault, a glittering maelstrom on the steps of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The air itself seemed to vibrate thick with the percussive roar of hundreds of photographers, shouting the frenzied clicking of a million shutters, and the electric hum of the crowd pressed against the barricades, their cell phones held aloft like a sea of digital offerings. This year's theme, Celestial Bodies, had inspired a parade of ethereal and often outlandish creations, turning the grand staircase into a river of silk satin and starlight. It was a night for legends, not for amateurs. Into this crucible of judgment, Ethan and Isabella arrived. Their entrance was precisely as subtle as a car alarm. The rented vintage Rolls-Royce, a monstrous confection of cream and chrome, was so ostentatiously large, it had trouble navigating the turn onto the carpet, causing a momentary, embarrassing gridlock. Inside, Ethan had spent the final moments giving Isabella a frantic, whispered pep talk. Remember, chin up, look bored, indifferent, like you belong here. Don't smile too much. It looks desperate. And for God's sake, let me do the talking if anyone from Vogue approaches. Isabella, who was busy applying a final sticky layer of lip gloss in her phone's camera, simply nodded the advice washing over her, like a gentle, unheeded wave. Don't worry, baby, she'd purred. I know how to work a camera. Ethan stepped out first, a peacock in a ludicrously ill-advised tuxedo of crushed navy velvet, with a satin lapel so wide it looked like a pair of wings. His bow tie, a matching velvet monstrosity, threatened to eclipse his chin. He plastered a smirk on his face, a pathetic imitation of the confident swagger he'd seen in movies, and struck a pose. Isabella emerged after him, a human disco ball poured into a skin-tight silver-sequined gown with a neckline that plunged to her navel and a slit that climbed dangerously high up her thigh. The dress was designed not to be admired, but to be noticed, a desperate scream for attention, in a room full of confident whispers. They were an assault on the senses, a garish splash of new money and boundless ego. They posed together, their movements stiff, choreographed, and utterly devoid of warmth. Ethan's hand on Isabella's back looked less like an affectionate caress, and more like he was maneuvering a piece of furniture into place. Isabella cycled through her three signature poses: the pout, the over-the-shoulder smolder, and the hand-on-hip pout. The veteran photographers on the line, men and women who could spot an imposter from 100 paces, took their obligatory shots with an air of weary disdain before turning their lenses away, searching for a more authentic moment, a real star. Ethan, however, was encased in a fortress of self-delusion. In his mind, the flashes were a confirmation of his status. The shouts were for him. He was the man who had it all: the movie star girlfriend, the bespoke life, a ticket to the most exclusive party on the planet. He felt a surge of triumphant glee. He scanned the crowd, his eyes hungry for recognitions, for the envious glances he was sure he was receiving. He was here. He had arrived. He had no idea he was merely the opening act for his own execution. Then a palpable shift occurred on the carpet. A quiet authority replaced the chaotic energy. The frantic shouting of the press died down, replaced by an expectant murmur. A sleek black Bentley Mulsanne, the automotive equivalent of a perfectly tailored tuxedo, pulled silently to a stop. Its presence was a statement of such profound and understated wealth that the gaudy Rolls-Royce parked ahead of it suddenly looked like a cheap toy. The chauffeur opened the door and Sebastian Croft emerged. He didn't need crushed velvet or an oversized bow tie. In a classic, exquisitely cut, Tom Ford tuxedo, he radiated a power that was both innate and absolute. He moved with an unhurried grace, a man completely at ease in his own skin and in any environment he chose to occupy. He turned, ignoring the now frantic press, and extended a hand into the car's dark interior. And then Olivia stepped out. It was not an entrance. It was an unveiling. The world seemed to hold its breath. A collective gasp rippled through the press line, a sound of pure, unadulterated awe. Olivia Parker, a woman the world had forgotten, had just become the undisputed center of the universe. She was a vision from a dream, a celestial Madonna brought to life. Her gown, a custom creation by a revered Parisian couturier, was a masterpiece of midnight blue silk chiffon that seemed to have captured the night sky itself. The fabric flowed around her, cascading in soft, ethereal layers that draped her 7-month pregnant form, not to hide it, but to celebrate it, to frame it as the miracle it was. The neckline was a graceful, off-the-shoulder sweep, and from her neck a single magnificent diamond necklace, a gift from Sebastian, rested against her collarbone, glittering like a captured constellation. Her honey-blonde hair was swept back into a low, intricate chignon, revealing the elegant line of her neck. Her face, free of the heavy makeup favored by women like Isabella, was luminous. She glowed with an inner radiance, a serene, confident joy that no cosmetic could ever replicate. She was not playing a role. She was simply magnificently herself. Sebastian's hand rested gently on the small of her back, his touch both protective and proud. He looked at her not as an accessory, but as his queen. They were a tableau of genuine love, of quiet strength, of a power so profound it didn't need to announce itself. The photographers, who had been lethargic just moments before, erupted. The sound was a deafening, continuous roar of shutters, a desperate, frenzied volley to capture an image that was already iconic. They weren't just taking a picture. They were witnessing a moment. Olivia, Olivia, look this way, Mrs. Parker, over here, beautiful. The shouts were no longer dismissive. They were reverent. Ethan stood frozen 20 feet away, the smug grin melting from his face like wax. His mind struggled to process the vision before him. It was as if he was looking at a stranger. This radiant, celestial being couldn't be his Olivia, the quiet, sensible woman he had deemed burnt and uninspired. The woman he had cast aside was now the single most breathtaking creature he had ever seen. His gaze flickered from Olivia's serene magnificence to Isabella, who was now adjusting her dress, looking annoyed that the attention had shifted. In the brilliant glare of Olivia's authentic light, Isabella's sequins suddenly looked cheap. Her practiced pout seemed vulgar. Her overtly sexual dress looked desperate. He had bragged to his friends that he had traded in a sedan for a sports car. Now he saw the devastating truth. He had traded a priceless work of art for a cheap, factory-made replica. The realization was a physical blow. A wave of vertigo washed over him, and the triumphant sounds of the gala faded into a dull roar in his ears. Every cruel word he had ever said to her came rushing back, each one a fresh stab of shame. He had called her life stagnation. He had called himself a pioneer of authenticity. The hypocrisy was so vast, so profound, it threatened to swallow him whole. He and Isabella were now completely invisible, two ghosts haunting the edge of the frame. The entire world was focused on Olivia and Sebastian as they began to ascend the grand staircase. As they passed the spot where Ethan stood, paralyzed, Olivia's gaze for a single shattering second met his. He braced himself for a look of triumph, of anger, of smug satisfaction. He would have welcomed it, but it never came. Instead, her eyes held only a quiet, profound pity. It was a look that didn't say, "I told you so." It said, "I'm so sorry for you." It was the look one gives to something broken, something small and sad. And in that single, devastating glance, she stripped him of his anger, his pride, and the last vestiges of his dignity. He was not her villain. He wasn't even a footnote. He was simply an object of her compassion. That was the deepest cut of all. The rest of the evening was a masterclass in public humiliation. Inside the museum, while Olivia and Sebastian were personally greeted by Anna Wintour and escorted to the co-chair's table at the very heart of the gala, Ethan and Isabella were directed by a clipboard-wielding assistant to a table in the far-flung hinterlands of the room. It was a social Siberia, populated by reality T-stars, TikTok influencers, and the forgotten plus ones of more important people. The air at their table was thick with the desperate energy of people who knew they didn't quite belong. From his miserable vantage point, Ethan was forced to watch the main event. He saw Olivia, seated next to a legendary film director, engaged in an animated conversation, her laughter echoing softly. He saw Sebastian in a deep discussion with a tech visionary who had changed the world. They were not just attending the party, they were the party. The final nail in the coffin of his ego came during the evening's speeches. Sebastian took the stage, and the vast room fell silent. He spoke eloquently about the museum, about the power of art. Then his voice softened, and he turned his gaze directly to Olivia. Art, in its highest form, allows us to see the world anew, he said, his voice resonating with deep emotion. And tonight, I am here with the greatest artist I have ever known. My partner, Olivia Parker, who has taught me the true meaning of resilience, grace, and the transformative power of a loving heart. She has taken the broken pieces of a life and is building a masterpiece of strength and beauty. And she is creating our family's own masterpiece right now. He gestured gently towards her, a look of overwhelming love on his face. Thank you for inspiring me and the world every single day. The room erupted in a wave of heartfelt applause. Olivia's eyes shone with tears as she looked back at him. Her expression, a perfect portrait of love, returned. Ethan felt the applause like a series of physical blows. He had had that love. He had held that masterpiece in his hands, and in his blind, arrogant stupidity, he had thrown it into the fire. He risked a glance at Isabella. She had missed the entire speech. She was hunched over her phone, her face illuminated by its pale light, furiously editing a selfie she had taken of her dessert plate, her thumb swiping through filters, utterly absorbed in her own tiny digital world. He looked from her vacant expression to the radiant, beloved woman across the room. He had bragged to everyone that his mistress looked like a movie star, but his pregnant ex-wife had just become royalty, and he, Ethan Thorne, the self-proclaimed king of the upgrade, was nothing more than a court jester in the ruins of his own pathetic kingdom. And there you have it, a story of love loss and the ultimate, most satisfying revenge. Olivia's journey from a heartbroken, discarded wife to a radiant, empowered woman on the arm of a man who truly valued her is a powerful reminder that our stories are not defined by those who leave us, but by the strength we find within ourselves to rewrite our own endings. Ethan, in his blind arrogance, thought he could simply trade up, but he learned the hard way that true value isn't found in flashy appearances, but in the quiet, unshakable strength of a person's character. What did you think of Olivia's incredible transformation? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more tales of epic comebacks and karmic justice, don't forget to hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will leave you cheering. Your support helps us to continue bringing you the stories you love. Thanks for watching. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper meant for her ears alone, but loud enough for the entire table to hear. You know, Clara, he said, a smug grin playing on his lips as he looked at his glowing bride. I'm glad you came. It's good for you to see what real success looks like. He gestured around the opulent ballroom, filled with New York's elite. Some people are destined for greatness, and some are just a stepping stone. He then turned to his new wife's father, a powerful senator, and declared, Honestly, looking back, Clara was a nobody, a sweet little placeholder before my real life began. The laughter at the table felt like a physical blow, but what happened next wasn't just a comeback. It was a fairy tale rewriting of history that would leave them all speechless. The invitation had felt like a shard of glass in the mail. A thick, cream-coloured cardstock embossed with the gold leaf initials B and say P. Brendan Holloway and Penelope Davies. Clara Abernathy had stared at it for a full 10 minutes, her coffee growing cold on the granite countertop of the small apartment she'd moved into after the divorce. Her name, Ms. Clara Abernathy, was written in elegant calligraphy, a cruel courtesy. Why invite her? Was it a power play? A final public twist of the knife. Her best friend Sophia had been unequivocal. You burn it, she'd commanded over the phone. You burn it, then you take the ashes, mix them into a margarita, and toast to your freedom. Do not go, Clara. That man is a black hole of narcissism. Clara had laughed, but the advice didn't stick. A small, treacherous part of her needed to go. She needed to see it with her own eyes to fully sever the cord of the 10 years they had spent together. 5, dating 5, married. 10 years where she had put her own ambitions on hold. Her doctorate in Renaissance art history had been indefinitely postponed. Her promising career as a museum curator had been downsized to freelance archival work she could do from home, all to support Brendan's burgeoning tech empire. She had managed his schedule, hosted his investors, charmed his rivals, and edited his speeches. She had been the silent, steady scaffolding upon which he built his skyscraper of success. And when he'd reached the penthouse, he decided he wanted a new view. He'd left her for Penelope Davies, the daughter of a political dynasty whose social connections could open doors even Brendan's money couldn't. The divorce had been swift and brutal. He called her unambitious. He said she lacked the drive for the world he now lived in. He made her feel small, provincial, like a dusty relic he was clearing out of his new gleaming life. So she went to the wedding. She wore a simple, elegant navy blue dress, understated, but expensive enough not to look pitiful. She held her head high as she walked into the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel, a place where she and Brendan had once celebrated an anniversary. The air was thick with the scent of thousands of white roses and the low hum of immense wealth. She found her assigned table in a respectable yet pointedly distant corner. It was filled with a few old mutual friends from their university days, people who offered her sympathetic smiles that felt more like pity. From her seat, she had a perfect view of the head table. Brendan was incandescently happy, his arm draped possessively around Penelope, who was a vision in a couture gown that probably cost more than Clara's entire apartment. They looked like a power couple on the cover of a magazine, polished, perfect, and utterly ruthless. The speeches were a masterclass in sycophancy. People lauded Brendan's genius, his vision, his relentless ambition. No one mentioned the woman who had spent a decade fueling that ambition. It was as if she had been erased from his history. Clara picked at her sea bass, the food tasting like ash in her mouth. She felt like a ghost at the feast. The moment came after the cake was cut. Brendan flushed with champagne, and adulation began making his rounds. When he arrived at her table, a hush fell over their small group. He greeted his old friends with backslapping bonhomie before his eyes landed on her. "Clara," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "I'm surprised you came. You invited me, Brendan," she replied, her voice impressively steady. "A courtesy, of course." He chuckled. He leaned in, and that's when he delivered the lines that would echo in her mind for months. The whisper about her being a stepping stone, a placeholder, a nobody. He didn't just say it to her. He said it for the benefit of his new father-in-law, Senator Davies, who was standing beside him. The senator gave a dismissive smirk, looking Clara up and down, as if she were a piece of lint on his son-in-law's perfect suit. The old friends at the table shifted uncomfortably, staring down at their plates. No one defended her. In Brendan's world, loyalty was currency, and Clara was bankrupt. The laughter, led by Brendan himself, was the final straw. It wasn't loud or boisterous, but a low, confident chuckle of shared superiority. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on her, past her worth her dignity. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. She didn't trust herself to speak. The carefully constructed wall of composure she had built around herself crumbled into dust. She stood up her chair, scraping against the marble floor. Her hands were shaking. "If you'll excuse me," she murmured, her voice a thread. She didn't look at Brendan again. She turned and walked, not ran out of the ballroom. She kept her back straight, her steps measured, even as tears began to blur the glittering chandeliers into streaks of blinding light. Each step was an agony of humiliation. She could feel hundreds of pairs of eyes on her back, could hear the whispers already starting. Once she was in the lobby, the dam broke. She ducked into a deserted hallway, pressing her back against the cold wall, as silent, hot tears streamed down her face. He hadn't just broken her heart. He had tried to break her spirit. He had publicly branded her as worthless a footnote in the grand story of his life. In that moment, in the gilded hallway of a five-star hotel, Clara Abernathy felt like less than a nobody. She felt invisible. She vowed then and there that she would never ever let anyone make her feel that way again. The first step was to get as far away from Brendan Holloway's world as she possibly could. The 6 months that followed the wedding were a study in grey. Clara threw herself into her work with a ferocity that bordered on obsession, not for ambition, but for survival. It was the only thing that kept the memory of Brendan's voice at bay. She took on any freelance project she could find, cataloguing private collections for insurance purposes, writing dry academic descriptions for auction houses, authenticating minor works for estates. It was solitary, meticulous work that occupied her hands and her mind. Her small apartment, once a symbol of her reduced circumstances, became her sanctuary. It was filled with books on art history, reproductions of Renaissance masterpieces, and the faint smell of archival paper and linseed oil. It was her world, a world Brendan had never understood or valued. He'd once walked into her home office, looked at a priceless 16th century manuscript she was studying, and asked if it was worth a lot. He didn't see the history, the artistry, or the soul within the vellum pages. He only saw a price tag. Sophia remained her anchor. She'd show up unannounced with takeout and wine, refusing to let Clara disappear completely into her cocoon of grief and work. "You need a project, a real one," Sophia said one evening, gesturing at the stacks of paperwork on Clara's dining table. "Something that lights you up, something that reminds you that you are Clara Abernathy, the woman who could spot a forgery from 20 paces, and who wrote the most brilliant dissertation proposal on Donatello's lost works that our entire department had ever seen." "That woman doesn't exist anymore," Clara said flatly, sorting through photographs of Rococo furniture. "Bull," Sophia retorted. "She's just buried under 10 years of a soul-crushing marriage. We need to excavate her." The excavation began with an unexpected email. It came from a Dr. Alleman, the curator of a private foundation based in Geneva. The email was formal and intriguing. The foundation had recently acquired a collection of items from a defunct Italian monastery, including a severely damaged 15th century Book of Hours. The manuscript was believed to be from the workshop of a Florentine master, but its water and smoke damage was so extensive that most institutions had deemed its restoration impossible. De Allemand had come across a paper Clara had published in a niche art journal 5 years prior on innovative techniques for restoring fire-damaged pigments. "Your methodology, Ms. Abernathy," he wrote, "while unconventional, is precisely the kind of bold approach this project requires. The foundation would be honored if you would consider taking on the commission as the lead restorer. The work would take place in our private restoration studio in Florence, Italy. All expenses, plus a generous stipend, would be provided. We anticipate the project will take approximately 1 year. Florence, the heart of the Renaissance. The city she had dreamed of living in since she was a girl. It felt less like a job offer, and more like a lifeline thrown from another world. Doubt gnawed at her. Could she do it? It had been years since she'd worked on a project of this magnitude. Her confidence was a fragile, shattered thing. She read the email a dozen times, her heart pounding. The thought of leaving New York, of putting an ocean between herself and Brendan's suffocating influence, was intoxicating. She called Sophia, her voice trembling. I think I'm going to Florence." Sophia's shriek of joy was so loud, Clara had to pull the phone away from her ear. "It's a sign, Clara. It's the universe telling you to go be brilliant. Say yes. Say yes right now before you talk yourself out of it." Clara did. She typed her acceptance with shaking fingers, a spark of the old passionate art historian flickering back to life inside her. 2 months later, she had packed up her life, put her belongings in storage, and boarded a plane to Italy. The restoration studio was not what she expected. It wasn't a sterile modern facility. It was located in a centuries-old palazzo on a quiet street near the Oltrarno, the artisan quarter of Florence. The studio itself occupied the top floor with massive arched windows that flooded the room with the famed Tuscan light. It smelled of old wood turpentine and history. Dr. Allemand was a kind, elderly Swiss man who treated the damaged manuscript with the reverence of a holy relic. He introduced her to the small team of junior conservators and then left her to her work, trusting her completely. The manuscript was in even worse condition than she had imagined. Its leather cover was charred, the vellum pages were fused together by water and heat, and the once vibrant illuminations were obscured by a layer of grime and soot. It was a Herculean task. For the first few weeks, Clara felt overwhelmed, but then she found her rhythm. She lost herself in the painstaking process. The world shrank to the tip of her scalpel, the delicate brush she used to clear away debris, the chemical formulas she mixed to stabilize the fragile ink. She worked from dawn until dusk, fueled by espresso and a renewed sense of purpose. Slowly, painstakingly, the book began to reveal its secrets. Beneath the grime, she uncovered breathtaking images, saints draped in robes of lapis lazuli, intricate borders of gold leaf and crushed berries, tiny detailed landscapes in the margins. It wasn't just a book, it was a masterpiece. Every restored page felt like a personal victory, a reclamation of her own identity. She was no longer Brendan Holloway's discarded wife. She was Clara Abernathy, a restorer of lost beauty. She explored Florence on her days off, wandering through the Uffizi Gallery and the Bargello Museum, feeling like she was among old friends. She learned to order coffee in Italian, found a favorite trattoria where the owner knew her by name, and let the warmth of the Italian sun melt away the last of the New York chill. One afternoon, about 4 months into her work, she was hunched over a particularly difficult page, trying to analyze the chemical composition of a faded green pigment. The studio was quiet, except for the hum of the dehumidifier. "That's an unusual copper resonate," a deep, accented voice said from behind her. "Most workshops of that era would have used malachite." Clara jumped, startled. She turned to see a man standing in the doorway of the studio. He was tall and dressed in a simple but well-tailored linen shirt and trousers, no suit, no tie. He had thoughtful, dark eyes and a quiet air of authority. She had never seen him before. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you." He said his English perfect, but with a cadence she couldn't quite place. "Dr. Allemand allowed me to come up. I'm a patron of the foundation." "Oh," Clara said, feeling a bit flustered. "I'm Clara Abernathy." "I know." He smiled, and it transformed his serious face. I've been following the reports on your progress. It's miraculous work. My name is Alex. Just Alex. He walked closer, his eyes fixed on the manuscript. He didn't ask what it was worth. He asked about the artist's technique, the story depicted in the illumination, the reason for the unusual pigment choice. His questions were insightful, born of a genuine and deep knowledge of the subject. For the first time in years, Clara found herself in a conversation with a man who spoke her language, the language of art history and passion. They talked for over an hour, their heads bent over the ancient book. He listened with an intensity that made her feel seen and heard in a way she hadn't felt in a very long time. There was a calmness about him, a lack of pretense that was the complete antithesis of Brendan's brash arrogance. When he finally left, promising to check in on her progress again soon, Clara realized she was smiling a real, unforced smile. The grey that had clouded her world for so long was finally beginning to break, letting in the warm, golden light of the Tuscan sun. Alex became a regular visitor to the studio. He would appear once or twice a week, always unannounced, always with a coffee for her and a quiet, respectful curiosity about her work. He never stayed too long, but his visits became the highlight of Clara's week. Their conversations flowed easily from the chemical composition of 15th century gesso to the political intrigues of the Medici family to their shared love for the quiet, hidden corners of Florence. He told her he was in the family business, a vague term that she interpreted as old European money. He was well-traveled, speaking several languages fluently, and possessed a formal sort of grace that seemed slightly out of place in the modern world. But with her, he was just Alex. He was funny, self-deprecating, and had a surprisingly encyclopedic knowledge of Renaissance military history, which he claimed was a boyhood obsession. He drew her out of her shell. He encouraged her to talk about her own research, her postponed doctorate, her theories on Donatello. He listened with rapt attention, his dark eyes never leaving her face, making her feel like her ideas were the most fascinating things in the world. He was, she realized with a jolt, one day, the first person who had ever made her feel that her mind was her most attractive quality. One Friday, as she was finishing for the day, he appeared in the doorway. "Enough with these dusty pages," he said with a smile. "I'm kidnapping you for dinner. There's a place in the hills above the city. You need to see the sunset from there." Clara hesitated for only a second before agreeing. That evening, as they sat on a terrace overlooking the glittering panorama of Florence, the Duomo, a majestic silhouette against a sky painted in shades of orange and violet, she felt a sense of peace she hadn't known was possible. "You seem different here," Alex observed, swirling the wine in his glass. "From the person Dr. Alamond described in the initial file." Clara took a deep breath, the Chianti giving her a sliver of courage. "The person in that file was coming out of a difficult time. I was married for 5 years, to a man who didn't appreciate dusty pages." She found herself telling him about Brendan, not in a torrent of anger, but in a quiet, matter-of-fact way. She spoke of the gradual erosion of her confidence of feeling like an accessory rather than a partner. She didn't mention the final humiliating scene at the wedding. It was still too raw. Alex listened without interruption, his expression unreadable but intense. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "He sounds," Alex said finally, his voice carefully neutral, "like a man who is terrified of anything he cannot purchase or control. Your passion for your work is something authentic. He couldn't own it, so he tried to diminish it." His simple, insightful summary lanced the wound more cleanly than any of Sophia's furious tirades had. He understood. He saw it not as her failure, but as Brendan's. Their relationship deepened over the following weeks. Dinners turned into long walks along the Arno, and conversations in the studio became more personal. There was an undeniable chemistry between them, an intellectual and emotional spark that grew brighter with each meeting. Yet Alex remained somewhat of a mystery. He never spoke much about his family, and when she asked about his business, he would deflect with a charming joke. Clara didn't press. She was enjoying the present too much to worry about the details of his past. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday. Clara had made a major breakthrough successfully, separating two vellum pages that had been fused together for centuries, revealing a stunning, perfectly preserved, full-page illumination. She was ecstatic and wanted to share the news with Alex. Remembering he had mentioned an interest in modern sculpture, she decided to surprise him. She knew he occasionally visited a small exclusive gallery near the Ponte Vecchio. She found the gallery easily. As she pushed open the heavy glass door, she saw him immediately. He was standing in the center of the room with two other men, both impeccably dressed in dark suits. But it wasn't the men that made her stop in her tracks. It was the way they were deferred to him. It was the palpable aura of importance that surrounded him, something she had been oblivious to in the quiet intimacy of her studio. As she watched from the doorway, a well-dressed woman walked by speaking into her phone in rapid Italian. Yes, Prince Alistair is here himself. Unbelievable. He almost never makes public appearances. Prince Alistair. The name echoed in the sudden silence of Clara's mind. Her blood ran cold. She backed out of the doorway, her heart hammering against her ribs. She stumbled down the street in a daze, the rain soaking her hair. Prince Alistair. It couldn't be. She rushed back to her apartment, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key in the lock. She flew to her laptop and typed Prince Alistair into the search bar. The screen filled with images of him standing on a palace balcony next to an elegant, regal-looking woman, him shaking hands with world leaders, him in full military dress uniform. The articles identified him as His Serene Highness Prince Alistair Leopold of Eldoria, the heir apparent to the small, wealthy European principality, nestled between Switzerland and Austria. Eldoria was known for its banking privacy, its political neutrality, and its royal family's immense, centuries-old private art collection. The foundation she was working for was their primary philanthropic entity. Alex wasn't just a patron. He was the foundation. She felt a wave of nausea. He had lied to her, or rather, he had omitted the single most important detail about his life. She felt foolish, naive, a prince. What was she, a struggling art restorer, doing getting involved with a prince? It was a fairy tale, and she was a woman who no longer believed in them. All her insecurities came rushing back. Was she just a curiosity to him? A temporary diversion, a commoner he was slumming it with before returning to his world of palaces and princesses? The anger was quickly followed by a deep, aching sadness. The connection she had felt with him, which had seemed so real and genuine, now felt tainted by the enormous secret he had kept. He must have sensed her retreat. He called her that evening, his voice laced with concern. Clara, is everything all right? You seem distant. You should have told me, she said, her voice small and tight. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. You went to the gallery, he stated. It wasn't a question. Yes. Clara, can I see you? He asked, his voice low and urgent. Please, let me explain. He came to her apartment 20 minutes later. He looked different, stripped of the princely context. He was just Alex, looking worried and standing awkwardly in her book-cluttered living room. Why didn't you tell me? She asked, wrapping her arms around herself. When I first met you, I wanted you to see me, not the title, he said earnestly, taking a step closer. My entire life, people have treated me differently because of it. They are either sycophants or they are hostile. With you in the studio, it was the first time in a very long time I felt like I was just a man talking to a woman I was intensely interested in. I was selfish. I wanted to keep that feeling for as long as I could. So I was an experiment, an escape. No, he said, his voice firm. You are a revelation. You are the most intelligent, passionate, and resilient person I have ever met. Everything I feel for you is real, Clara. The title, the duties, the palace. That's my circumstance. It's not who I am. Alex is closer to who I am than Prince Alistair has ever been. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes. I know this is a shock, and I'm so sorry for not being honest sooner. But please don't let my name change what we've found. Clara looked at him, the man who discussed pigments and brushstrokes with her, who brought her coffee, who made her laugh. And she looked at the photos on her laptop screen of the prince in the gilded cage. It was a dizzying, impossible choice. Her head screamed at her to run to protect her newly healed heart from what was sure to be a world of pain and complexity. But her heart, which had been dormant for so long, whispered that this man, prince or not, was worth the risk. I don't know how to do this, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. I don't know how to be with a prince. Alistair closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. They were warm and steady. You don't have to be with a prince, he said softly. Just be with me. We'll figure out the rest together. Dating a prince, Clara quickly learned, was less about fairy tale romance and more about navigating a minefield of protocol press and public expectation. The transition from the quiet anonymity of Florence to the scrutinized world of Eldoria's royal court was jarring. Alistair was true to his word. He did everything he could to shield her. Their relationship was kept intensely private for the first few months. They met in secluded villas owned by the royal family in the Swiss Alps or on the French Riviera, places where they could be Alex and Clara. In those stolen weeks, their bond deepened into a profound love. He was her staunchest supporter, encouraging her to formally re-enroll in her doctoral program, offering her access to the Eldorian Royal Archives, which contained countless unstudied Renaissance documents. For the first time, Clara felt like she was part of a true partnership, where her ambitions were not just tolerated, but celebrated. But the secret couldn't last. A paparazzo with a long lens caught them sharing a coffee on a hotel balcony in Geneva. The photo was grainy but unmistakable. The next day, the headline was global: Mystery Woman and the Reclusive Prince, who is Alistair's American love. The floodgates opened. Reporters dug into her past. They uncovered her modest upbringing, her abandoned academic career, and inevitably her marriage to and divorce from Brendan Holloway. She was painted as a commoner, a divorcee, an unlikely companion for the blue-blooded prince. Brendan, of course, was contacted by every tabloid on the planet. To her surprise, he declined to comment publicly, but his silence was loud. Through mutual acquaintances, Clara heard the narrative he was spinning privately, that she was an ambitious social climber who had likely targeted the prince, that he had let her go because she wasn't content once with a normal life. It was a lie designed to protect his own ego, recasting her as a calculating gold digger rather than the woman he had discarded. The true test came when Alistair formally introduced her to his mother, Queen Beatrix of Eldoria. The Queen was a formidable woman in her 70s, with piercing blue eyes and an air of unshakable authority. They met for tea in a lavishly appointed drawing room in the royal palace of Eldenburg. The room was cold, filled with priceless antiques and portraits of stern-faced ancestors. Queen Beatrix was polite, but her questions were surgical. She inquired about Clara's family, her education, her previous marital arrangement. Every question was designed to highlight the immense gulf between Clara's world and theirs. Our world, Ms. Abernathy, values tradition and discretion above all, the Queen stated, her voice as crisp as starched linen. Alistair's life is not his own. It belongs to this country. His wife must be prepared for a life of duty sacrifice and unrelenting public scrutiny. It is not a role for the faint of heart, or for one seeking personal fulfillment. It was a clear warning. Clara felt a flicker of the old insecurity, the fear of not being good enough. But then she looked at Alistair, who was watching her with unwavering support. She thought of the woman she had become in Florence, confident, passionate, and unwilling to be diminished. Your Majesty, Clara began, her voice calm and respectful. I fell in love with your son, the man, not the prince. I understand the responsibilities that come with his position, and I do not take them lightly, but I believe a life of duty does not have to be a life devoid of personal passion. Perhaps what this country needs isn't just a princess who can wave from a balcony, but one who can also contribute something of substance. My field is history, the preservation of culture. That is the bedrock upon which Eldoria itself is built. I believe I can serve this country well, not by erasing who I am, but by embracing it. There was a long, tense silence. Queen Beatrix studied Clara for what felt like an eternity, her gaze unblinking. Finally, a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't acceptance, but it was a grudging respect. Clara had not bowed. She had held her ground with grace and intelligence. Meanwhile, back in New York, Brendan Holloway's world was not as perfect as it appeared. His marriage to Penelope was already showing signs of strain. Penelope was a brilliant social asset, but she was also incredibly expensive and demanding. Their life was a constant performance for the press, and the pressure was mounting. More worryingly, Brendan's tech company, Holloway Innovations, was facing a government investigation over alleged data privacy violations. The stock was plummeting, and his carefully curated image as a visionary genius was beginning to tarnish. The news of Clara's relationship with a prince hit him like a physical shock. He saw the paparazzi photos online and felt a bizarre, possessive rage. His quiet, unassuming Clara with a prince. It didn't compute. He'd told everyone she was a nobody. Nobodies didn't end up with royalty. His immediate reaction was denial, followed by a burning need to reassert his dominance. He had one of his assistants do a deep dive on Prince Alistair and Eldoria. What he found only stoked his fury. The Eldorian royal family's wealth was ancient, private, and dwarfed his own new money. They had a level of prestige and power that he could only dream of. His ex-wife hadn't just moved on. She had ascended to a stratosphere he couldn't touch. It made his own upgrade to Penelope, the senator's daughter, feel suddenly second-rate. The humiliation he had inflicted on Clara at his wedding now felt like a terrible miscalculation. He had created a narrative where she was the failure. Her new reality threatened to unravel that story, and in doing so, expose him as the fool. He became obsessed, checking news sites for updates on her, a bitter envy coiling in his gut. He needed to see her. He needed to confront this new reality and somehow bend it back to his will. His chance, he soon discovered, was coming. The Eldorian Royal Foundation was the primary sponsor of the upcoming Metropolitan Art Gala in New York, one of the biggest social events of the year, and its new patrons, Prince Alistair and his official fiancée, Clara Abernathy, would be the guests of honor. The Metropolitan Art Gala was the apex of the New York social scene, a glittering spectacle of power, wealth, and couture. For Brendan and Penelope, it was the most important night of the year, a chance to network, to be seen, and to project an image of untouchable success, especially now that his company was weathering a storm of bad press. Brendan needed a win. He needed to look like the king of his world. He felt a nervous energy crackling in his veins as he adjusted his Tom Ford tuxedo in the back of the town car. Penelope, beside him in a shimmering, barely there silver gown, was scrolling through her phone, critiquing the early arrivals on a gossip blog. "Oh, look, the Vanderbilts are here," she sniffed. "Her dress is last season." Brendan wasn't listening. He was scanning the same sites, but he was only looking for one thing, a glimpse of Clara. He had seen the official announcement of their engagement a month prior, a simple, elegant statement from the Eldorian royal palace. It included a stunning portrait of Clara, her face glowing with a confidence he'd never seen before, a sapphire on her finger that made Penelope's massive diamond look gaudy. The announcement had also mentioned her formal acceptance into a prestigious doctoral program, with her research sponsored by the Royal Foundation. It was a public validation of everything he had once dismissed. His stomach clenched. He had told himself and everyone else that she was a nobody, but the world was now calling her Her Serene Highness, the future Princess of Eldoria. As they stepped onto the red carpet, the flashbulbs were blinding. The reporters shouted their names. Brendan put on his practiced, confident smile, his arm firmly around Penelope's waist. They were a power couple. He repeated the phrase to himself like a mantra. Inside the gala was a dizzying swirl of champagne orchestral music and the low roar of 1,000 conversations. Brendan schmoozed and smiled, but his eyes kept darting towards the grand staircase, where the guests of honor were scheduled to make their entrance. And then a hush fell over the hall. An announcer's voice boomed through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our honored guests from the Principality of Eldoria, His Serene Highness, Prince Alistair, and his fiancée, Ms. Clara Abernathy." Every head turned. Clara appeared at the top of the stairs, and the sight of her stole the air from Brendan's lungs. She was not the quiet, mousy woman. He remembered the one who would shrink in his shadow. The woman on the staircase was luminous. She wore a deep emerald green gown that shimmered under the chandeliers, her shoulders bare, her posture poised and regal. Her hair was swept up, showcasing a simple but elegant diamond necklace. She was beautiful, but more than that, she was radiant with a self-possession that was utterly captivating. She looked like she belonged there. Beside her, Prince Alistair was the very picture of quiet dignity, his eyes fixed on Clara with an expression of pure adoration. They descended the stairs, not like celebrities seeking attention, but with the calm grace of people who were completely secure in their world. Brendan felt a hot, prickling wave of something he hadn't felt in years: inadequacy. He watched as the most powerful people in the room, EU senators, cultural icons, parted to let them pass their heads, nodding in deference. Penelope, sensing the shift in the room's gravity, whispered, "My God, is that your ex-wife?" Her voice was sharp with disbelief and a note of insecurity. "It is," Brendan managed to say, his throat tight. He had to get to her. The compulsion was overwhelming. He excused himself from a conversation with a tech billionaire and began to move through the crowd, Penelope trailing anxiously behind him. He felt like a shark moving toward its prey, but for the first time he wasn't sure who was the predator and who was the prey. He intercepted them, near a towering floral arrangement. "Clara," he said, his voice coming out louder and harsher than he intended. Clara and Alistair stopped. She turned and her eyes met his. There was no flicker of pain, no fear, no lingering hurt. There was just a cool, polite blankness. It was the look one gives a stranger who has mistaken you for someone else. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Have we met?" The question hung in the air between them, a perfect, devastating blow. For a moment, Brendan was speechless. She was pretending not to know him. Him, Brendan Holloway, the man who had built her and then broken her. "Clara, it's me, Brendan," he stammered, a flush creeping up his neck. A few people nearby had turned to watch, their curiosity piqued. "Ah, yes, Brendan," she said, her expression changing to one of faint, distant recognition, like someone trying to recall a minor character from a long-forgotten play. "Holloway, of course. How are you?" It was a masterstroke of dismissal. She had stripped him of all his power, of their entire shared history, with a few simple words. Prince Alistair stood silently by her side, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. He didn't need to say a word. His presence alone was a statement. He looked at Brendan with an air of mild, regal indifference, as if observing an insect. Brendan, floundering, felt his arrogance reassert itself as a defense mechanism. "I see you've done well for yourself," he said, gesturing vaguely at Alistair. "I have to say I'm impressed. I never took you for such an ambitious climber." The insult was clumsy, desperate. Penelope, standing beside him, winced. Clara didn't even flinch. A small, knowing smile touched her lips. You're mistaken, Brendan. Ambition is about wanting more than you have. I was never ambitious in that way. I simply learned to value what I already possessed. Her eyes met his, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something other than indifference. It was pity. My work, my passion, my self-respect. Things you never understood. Things it seems you still don't. She then turned to Penelope, extending a hand with effortless grace. You must be Penelope. It's a pleasure to meet you. Your dress is lovely. Penelope, flustered by the genuine kindness, shook her hand mutely. In that moment, the comparison was brutal. Penelope, in her flashy, revealing gown, looked like a pretender next to Clara's timeless elegance. Well, Brendan blustered, trying to regain control, my life, as you can see, has moved on to bigger and better things. He gestured at Penelope at the gala, at his whole world. Alistair chose that moment to speak, his voice low and cutting. Indeed, he said, his gaze sweeping over Brendan with icy disdain. I've read about your company's recent troubles with data privacy, a fascinating business model, selling the very soul of your clients. He paused, then delivered the final fatal strike. Her Serene Highness and I must be going. The director of the Met is waiting for us. Do try to enjoy what's left of your evening. He called her Her Serene Highness, not Clara, not my fiancée. He used her full future title, cementing her status, and in the same breath, erasing Brendan completely. With a final polite nod, Alistair guided Clara away. The crowd parted for them, then closed back in, leaving Brendan and Penelope standing alone in their wake. The whispers started instantly. The sympathetic looks were gone, replaced by smirks and poorly concealed amusement. He had tried to humiliate the nobody, and had instead been publicly dismantled by a prince and his future princess. Brendan stood frozen, the champagne in his hand tasting sour. He looked at his wife, whose face was a mask of fury and embarrassment. He looked around the room at the powerful people now ignoring him. He had built his world on the perception of power. In the space of 2 minutes, Clara, the woman he had branded a nobody, had shown everyone that his power was an illusion. She hadn't screamed or cried or sought revenge. She had simply outgrown him. And in doing so, she had left him behind, a ghost at a feast that was no longer his. The ride back to their penthouse was a silent, suffocating affair. The glittering lights of Manhattan blurred past the tinted windows of the Maybach, each one a pinprick in the thick blanket of tension inside the car. Brendan stared straight ahead, his jaw so tight it ached. He could still see the pity in Clara's eyes. It was worse than hatred, worse than anger. Pity was a judgment. It implied he was something small, something broken. Penelope sat rigidly on her side of the plush leather seat, her silver dress seeming to radiate a cold fury. She hadn't said a word since they'd made their hasty, humiliating exit from the gala. Her silence was more damning than any tirade. He was a man who controlled narratives, who bent reality to his will. Tonight, his own ex-wife had rewritten his story in front of the entire world, and he had been rendered utterly powerless. The moment the penthouse door clicked shut behind them, Penelope's control snapped. A nobody, she hissed, whirling on him. She ripped the diamond earrings from her lobes and threw them onto a marble console table, where they skittered with a series of sharp clicks. You told me she was a nobody, a sweet, unambitious little thing you left behind. That woman was not a nobody, Brendan. That woman made me look like a fool. Don't be ridiculous, he snapped, his voice rough. She got lucky. She latched onto some European relic with a title. Oh, stop it! Penelope's voice rose, laced with venom. You're the one who looks ridiculous. Did you see the way people looked at you at us? You didn't just get snubbed, you got erased. She looked at you like you were a piece of gum on her shoe. And her fiancé, the prince, he looked at you like you were something he was about to have scraped off. Every word was a nail in the coffin of his pride. He had married Penelope for her connections, for the image of power she projected. But in the face of true inherited prestige, her sharp-edged new money glamour had looked cheap, and in her eyes, he was now the one who had cheapened her brand. "My father will be hearing about this," she continued, her voice dropping to a dangerously low level. "He's been fielding calls all week about your company's ethical lapses. He was counting on tonight to smooth things over to project stability. Instead, you got into a public spat with your ex and a future head of state. You've made yourself a liability." That was the word that sealed it. Liability. It was the same cold corporate term he had used in his mind when he decided to divorce Clara. The foundation of his marriage to Penelope wasn't love. It was a merger, and he had just sent the stock plummeting. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion unraveling. The gala incident became the talk of the town, a juicy morsel of gossip that was reported with thinly veiled glee in every society column and financial blog. The story was always framed the same way: the arrogant tech mogul getting his public comeuppance. The narrative he had so carefully crafted of the brilliant visionary who had outgrown his simple first wife was shattered. The new narrative was far more compelling: the fool who threw away a diamond and was left holding glass. The bad press was like blood in the water for the sharks circling his company. Investors grew more skittish. The federal investigation intensified. His father-in-law, Senator Davies, who had once been his staunchest public defender, was now conspicuously silent. The political shield he had paid for with a wedding ring had been withdrawn. His marriage to Penelope disintegrated into a series of bitter transactional arguments held in hushed tones over breakfasts they didn't eat. It ended as it had begun, like a business deal gone sour. Her lawyers contacted his, and the divorce was even more brutal and public than his first one had been quiet and swift. Penelope, the ultimate social survivor, was determined to cut her losses and ensure everyone knew she was the wronged party escaping a failing enterprise. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, Clara was navigating a different kind of aftermath. As she and Alistair were driven away from the gala, she leaned her head against his shoulder, the adrenaline of the confrontation slowly seeping away, leaving a strange, quiet calm. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his hand covering hers. "I think so," she breathed. It felt final, like closing a book I didn't even realize was still open. She looked at him, her eyes clear and steady. "Thank you for standing with me, for calling me Her Serene Highness." Alistair smiled, a warmth that reached his eyes. "I was merely stating a fact and reminding a fool of what he lost." He grew more serious. "My mother will be pleased. She values grace under pressure above all else. Tonight you showed the world you are more than capable of handling yourself. You showed them you are a queen." He was right. The incident at the gala, contrary to what one might expect, solidified Clara's position within the royal ecosystem. Queen Beatrix, who had viewed Clara with cautious skepticism, now saw her as a strategic asset. She had faced down a hostile ghost from her past with a poise that protocol couldn't teach. She had defended the family's honor without raising her voice. It was a masterclass in royal power dynamics, and the Queen was deeply impressed. A year later, the world looked very different. Brendan Holloway had been forced to step down as CEO of his own company amidst the scandal and a disastrous settlement. His divorce had cost him a significant portion of his fortune. He was still a rich man, but his influence had vanished. He was a social pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about at the galas he was no longer invited to. On a bright autumn afternoon in Eldoria, Her Serene Highness Princess Clara was standing in the newly dedicated West Wing of the Royal Library. It had been her first major project, the creation of a state-of-the-art conservation and digitization center, making the priceless Eldorian archives accessible to scholars around the world. Dressed in a simple but elegant pantsuit, she was explaining the intricacies of restoring medieval inks to a group of visiting university students, her face alive with passion. She was in her element, not as a silent accessory, but as a driving force. She had woven her own identity into the fabric of her new life, creating a role that was uniquely hers, a blend of royal duty and academic passion. Later that day, Alistair found her in her private study, a beautiful room with arched windows overlooking the palace gardens. She was bent over a 15th century manuscript, the very same Book of Hours from Florence, now fully restored to its breathtaking glory. It was the centerpiece of the new collection. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Still hiding away with your dusty pages?" he murmured, his voice filled with affection. Clara leaned back against him, a contented smile on her face. "Some things never change," she said softly. She looked from the illuminated manuscript, a treasure she had saved from oblivion, to the view of the gardens beyond a future that was bright and full of promise. She had once lived in a world where she was told her passions made her a nobody. Now she lived in a world where those same passions helped her command a room, inspire others, and preserve history. She hadn't needed a prince to save her, but finding one who truly saw her, was the most beautiful chapter in the story she had written for herself. In the end, Clara's story isn't about marrying a prince. It's about a woman who was told she was a placeholder in someone else's life and decided to become the main character in her own. Her triumph wasn't the moment she walked into the gala with royalty on her arm. It was in the quiet, determined hours she spent in that dusty Florentine studio, painstakingly reclaiming her passion and her sense of self, piece by piece. The prince wasn't the prize. He was the wonderful consequence of her own journey to self-worth. Brendan tried to define her by her relationship with him, but Clara found her true power in defining herself by her own merits. Her story is a powerful reminder that the most dazzling glow-up has nothing to do with external validation, and everything to do with the quiet, unshakable confidence that comes from truly knowing your own value. If Clara's journey of resilience and self-discovery inspired you, please show your support by hitting that like button and sharing this video with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story of triumph and transformation. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments below. What part of Clara's story resonated with you the most? Thank you for watching.